Hello and welcome back to this course. Today in this video, we are going to start our new section in which we learn about the exceptional handling. Now, exceptional handling is the most important topic in Java. So you have to be active to learn this topic. So first of all, what is an exception? An exception is an unwanted or unexpected event which occurs during the execution of the program at runtime that disrupts the normal flow of the program instruction. Now, exception is basically a type of error. You can say that this is a type of error. For example, you are running your code and you may got some type of exception. You may got some type of error. Then we have to handle that. So whenever an exception occur, we have to handle that exception. So that's why we say it exception handling, because we are handling our exceptions that are occurring in our program. So there are two types of exceptions in the exception handling. First of all, unchecked exception and checked exception. First of all, unchecked exception occurs at the runtime and checked exception occurs at the compile time. Unchecked means that when we are running our program and we got some exception, then we got an error on the screen. And in checked exception, the errors or the exceptions are displayed to us at the compile time when we are compiling our program. So these are the two types of the exception: unchecked exception and checked exception. I hope you understand. And now this is the hierarchy of the exception handling. Now these all are the classes. First of all, we have a parent class. This is the parent class of all these child classes, that is throwable. Now throwable has two child classes, error and exception. Right now we only have to deal with the exception. So exception is the child class of the throwable, and an exception has further child classes. You can see in the hierarchy, first of all, IO exception and then runtime exception. These are two different classes and that has the same parent class, which is the exception. Now IO exception is the checked exception and runtime exception is the unchecked exception. Only runtime exception is the unchecked exception, otherwise all the child classes of the exception are the checked exception. Now in this hierarchy I have only mentioned 2 or 3 classes, but there are tons of classes in the exception. Basically those are the child of the exception classes. Here I have mentioned only 2, IO exception, runtime exception. Only runtime and its child classes are unchecked exception, otherwise all the child classes of the exception like IO exception are the checked exception. And so I hope you understand. So first of all, we will discuss about the unchecked exception or runtime exception. You can say that we will definitely write a program that will use the unchecked exception. Remember this hierarchy in your mind. First of all, the parent class, which is the throwable, and it has two child classes, error and exception, and we have to deal with the exception. And further, exception has the child classes. Now exception is divided into the two parts, checked exception and unchecked exception. Only runtime exception and its child classes are the unchecked exception, otherwise IO exception and all other the child classes of the exception are the checked exception. So I hope that you understand. Next, the get message method. This method returns the message string of the throwable, and the message can be provided while creating the exception through its constructor. Whenever we got an exception, we got a message on our screen that what is the exception. We can get that message through the get message method. Now this get message method is declared inside the throwable class, which is the parent class of all the classes, and all its child classes has the method get message, by which we can get the exception message. We can also write our own message and pass that message while creating the exception, and we will pass our own message in the constructor of the exception. Now let's see that how exception is handled in the Java. So you can see in this diagram, basically the blue box is the coding file. I have write some code in that file. Now if the exception occurs, by default, if we do nothing, we don't handle the exception, by default Java handles our exception. For example, we have written a code and there is an exception in that code. Then Java throws the object and the Java catch mechanism basically catch that object and throws the particular exception on the screen. Now Java throws which type of object? In our previous slide, we have discussed about these classes. For example, if we divide a number by 0, we know that this is an exception. And Java also take this as an exception. When we divide number by 0, when we divide any number by 0, then we got the arithmetic exception. This is a type of exception. So what Java will do, if we divide number by 0, then Java throws the object of the arithmetic exception and the catch mechanism will catch that object and throws the exception message on the screen. This is the by default procedure of the Java. If we do our own exception handling, then it will change. We don't do the exception handling, then this procedure will work. But if we write our own catch block, here the Java catch mechanism is working, but we can also write our own catch mechanism. You can see in this diagram that in our code section, I have written my code. And if there is any exception, if I want to handle that exception, then I can also write my own exception handling code. And if I write my exception handling code, then Java default catch mechanism will not executed. Our exception handling code will be executed. So there are 4 possibilities of exception handling. Number 1, default throw and default catch. This is the by default. If you don't do our exception handling, then by default, default throw and default catch is executed. And at number 2, we can use the default throw and we can define our own catch block. And the third point, we can define our own throw and the default catch of the Java is used. And at the end, we can create our own throw and our own catch mechanism. So these are the 4 possibilities in the exception handling. Now before moving toward our coding, I want to clear your concepts. Now, if the default catch mechanism is used, then just after printing the exception message, our program is going to exit just after the exception. But we don't want to exit our program, we want our program to continue. So we write our own catch block. If we write our own catch block, then our program is not going to execute. But if the default Java mechanism catch block is going to execute, then our program is also going to exit after displaying that exception. So always we have to write our own catch block. For example, there is an exception that is not exception in the Java, but in the real world that is an exception. For example, if the user withdraw money from the ATM, his balance is 5,000, but he executes 8,000 from the his account, then this is an exception. He cannot withdraw the money larger than his balance. So this is an exception. But in Java, this is not an exception. So in this case, we can throw our own exception and we can write our own catch mechanism so that our throw and our catch is executed and we handle our exception. So these are the 4 possibilities of the exception handling. We will discuss about all these 4 in our videos. For this video, we will discuss about the default throw and the default catch. So let's create a program and see how we will get the exception on in our program basically. So here in admin, first of all, I am going to type a statement here. I type here system.out.println and I type here 15 divided by 0. We know that we cannot divide any number by 0. Now if I run this program, you will see an exception on the screen. Exception in thread. We will discuss about the thread in our next section. Then we will discuss about the threading in Java. So exception in thread main java.lang.arithmetic exception. You see that we got the arithmetic exception, divide number by 0. This is the arithmetic exception. Now here Java default catch and Java default throw mechanism is working. This is the first case, default throw and the default catch. Now for example, I type a statement here, system.out.println, and I type here start of the program like this. And just after this line, I type another statement system.out.println, and I type here end of the program like this. Okay. So now if I run this program, you will see the first line start of the program, but just after that at the second line we got an arithmetic exception. And you can see after the exception we don't get the end of the program message on the console, because we know that when Java default catch mechanism is used, just after printing this message, the program is going to exit, and you can see that in this case our program has been exited and we don't get the message end of the program. Our program terminates here. So this is the Java default catch mechanism and Java throw mechanism basically. In the next video, we will discuss about the default throw and our own catch block. So if you feel any problem by understanding exception handling, you can definitely ask me a question or message me, I will help you. So that's it for this video. I will see you in next video. Hello and welcome back to this course. Today in this video, we are going to discuss about our next video about the exception handling. So today we will discuss about the default throw and our catch in the exception handling. In our previous video, we have discussed about what is the exception, what is exception handling, and what is default throw and the default catch mechanism in Java. So in this video, we will discuss about the default throw and our catch mechanism in our program. So without wasting our time, let's create a program in which we create our own catch mechanism. So first of all, we are going to use the three keywords in this program. First of all, try keyword, catch keyword, and finally keyword. So first of all, I type here try, and this is the block of the try. Now in the try block, I have to write some code. I write that code in this block that may contain some exception. For example, I type here system.out.println, and I type here again 15 divided by 0. We know that we got an arithmetic exception here. You can write any code in the try block, that should depend upon you. We only write that piece of code in the try block that may contain some exception, or maybe an exception can occur in that code. So we write that piece of code in the try, that if you try to execute this code, then we have to handle that code. And just after try, we have to use the catch. Catch is the keyword, so I type here catch, and just after the catch keyword, I just type the two parentheses, and in this parentheses, I have to create the reference variable of the particular exception class. In this case, I know that the arithmetic exception occur, so I type here arithmetic exception. E. Okay, and I type here system.out.println, and I type here our catch block, and I type the E dot. And in our previous video, I have also told you about the method which is the get message that help us to get the exception message basically. So I type here get message. Okay. So now what we are doing here, we have first of all write the try block. I have to write that piece of code in the try block that may contain some exception. We have to write that piece of code about which we feel that the exception may occur in this code. So we write that piece of code in the try block, and just after the try block, I have to write my own catch block. In the catch, this catch is the keyword, and after that I have to type the two parentheses, and in the parentheses I have to create the reference of the any exception class. For this case, the arithmetic exception occurs, so I type here arithmetic exception, and then type the name of the reference variable. I type here E, and in the body of the catch I can write many statements. That totally depends upon you. I write here single statement system.out.println our catch block, and we concatenate the e.getMessage to print the message on the screen. Now if I run this program, you will see our catch block, and by divide number by 0 we get the error exception message that divide number by 0 is the exception. Now you can see that our own catch mechanism is running. Okay, so now I again type statements here. I type here system.out.println, and I type here first line of the program, and also after the catch I type here system.out.println, and I type here end of the program, like this. Okay, so now if I run this program, you will see first line of the program, and then we have an exception in this line. We get our exception message, our catch block divided number by 0, and end of the program is now executing in our program. So whenever we write our own catch block, our program is not going to exit. The program will completely execute from the first line to the end line if we use our own catch mechanism, as we have used in this code basically. So you see that how we can use our own catch block. Now there are some important points that you have to keep in your mind. You can write many catch block as you want just after the this try block. For example, I type here catch, and there is another type of exception, that is null pointer exception. I type here null pointer exception e, and I type here system.out.println, and I type here our second catch block, and type here e.getMessage. Okay, so now I am going to generate the null pointer exception in my try block. So now I declare a variable outside this block. I type here string str equals to null, like this. And now in the try block I type here system.out.println, and I type here str.length, like this. Okay, so now if I run this program, you will see the first line of the program. Then again we get the our first catch block is executed this time because there is an exception in this line, so this line is not going to execute. So I comment this line, for instance here I comment this line, and now if I run this program, you will see our second catch block is executed. It stays null. Then this means that this is the null pointer exception. There is nothing in the variable, and we are printing the length of that variable, and that variable contains null. So that's why we get the exception, which is the null pointer exception. This time our second catch block is executed, which is the null. So I hope you understand that how we can use our own try catch. We can write many catch as we want, and also we can use the finally keyword in the exception handling. For example, I type here finally, and I type here system.out.println hello, like this. Okay, so now if I run this program, you will see hello on the screen. Okay, so what this finally block is doing here? Now we know that the catch block is only executed when we get the exception. For example, we get an exception here. This catch block is going to execute. If we get a null pointer exception like this, then this catch block is going to execute. But if we get nothing in the catch block, for example, I type here 20 and I change here like Java. Now there is no exception in this try block. And now if I run this program, you will see the first line of the program, and the 0, the answer, and the 4, which is the length of the string, and then again we get hello. Why we are getting hello? The code written within finally is always going to execute whether we get an exception or not. Finally code is always going to execute. Now in some scenarios when we get exception, and after that we must have to execute some code. So in that case we use finally. Finally block is always going to execute if we get exception or not. Final block is always going to execute. You see that in this case we have no exception, no catch block is executed, but finally block is still going to execute in our exception handling. Now you can only write one finally block after the try block. Basically, you cannot create more than one finally block. If I remove all these catch from here like this, you can simply use finally after that. But using the catch or finally is compulsory for you. Otherwise, you get an error. For example, I also remove finally block from here. You can see I got an error that try without catch, finally, or resource declaration. Means we have to use the catch or finally. In most of the cases, we use the catch, but in some scenarios, we also have to execute some piece of code. So in that case, we will use the finally block. So try, catch, finally are the three keywords. I hope you understand that how our own catch mechanism is working and how we are using the finally block. The code written within the finally block is always going to execute. Whether we are going to get an exception or not, the finally block is always going to execute after the try block. I hope that you understand. Anyhow, if you feel any problem, then you can definitely ask a question or message me. I will help you. So in our next video, we'll discuss about our own throw, but the default catch block of the Java. So I will see you in next video. Hello and welcome back to this course. Today in this video, we will discuss about the remaining part of the exception handling. In our previous video, we have discussed about the default throw and our own catch block. In this video, we will discuss about our own throw and the default catch of the Java. So without wasting our time, let's create a code in our NetBeans. Now to use my own throw, I have to use the throw keyword. Throw is a keyword that helps us to throw our own exception in the coding basically. So for example, I create a little program here. I type here int and I type here balance. And I initialize it with the 10,000. Okay. And I type here int withdrawal amount like this. And I type here 9,000 for an example. Okay. So now if I want to use my own throw, basically, so I type here if the withdrawal amount is greater than the balance, then throw. Now I have to create the object of the exception class here. I type here new, and this time I'm going to get the arithmetic exception. I type here arithmetic exception, and in the constructor I type the error message. I type here you don't have enough balance like this. Okay, I change the spelling. Okay, so if the withdrawal amount is greater than balance, then throw this arithmetic exception that you don't have enough balance. You have to create object of the exception classes here. For example, if there are chances to occur the null pointer exception, you throw here a new null pointer exception and the message you want to give to the user if that exception occur. It's totally depends upon you that which exception class do you want to use. So in this case, this is a mathematical calculation, so I use the arithmetic exception, and after that I type here balance equals to balance minus withdrawal amount. Okay, and I print a statement here, system.out.println amount withdrawal successfully. Okay. And also print a statement here, system.out.println, our program is going to continue. Okay. Now if I run this program, you will see amount withdrawal successfully. Our program is going to continue. Okay. So now if I change the amount here, I type here 11,000 like this. And now if I run this program, you will see exception in the thread main java.lang.arithmetic exception, because we have throw the arithmetic exception and we get the exception you don't have enough balance. You see the message that you have passed in the constructor that you don't have enough balance, and the object we have thrown is the of the arithmetic exception, so we get the arithmetic exception here. Now in this case we are throwing our own exception and the Java default catch mechanism is catching that object. In our previous video we have created our own catch block and Java is throwing the exception. But this time we are throwing the exception and Java default catch mechanism is catching that exception and showing us on the screen. Now for default Java throws mechanism, this is not an exception. We have throw this exception explicitly. So that's why we get an exception on the screen that your withdrawal amount is greater than the balance. And you can see that when we get an exception, all the lines after this exception are not executed because Java default catch mechanism is running, and we know that when Java default catch mechanism runs, whenever we get the exception, our program is just going to exit after that exception. So now we can also create our own catch mechanism, but we will discuss about our own throw and our own catch mechanism in our next video. So I hope that you understand this example, that how we can throw our own exception. In this case, we have the exception that if the withdrawal amount is greater than balance, then throw the arithmetic exception object, new arithmetic exception, and pass this message in the constructor that I want to show this message as the exception. Now one more thing, that you always have to create the object of the exception class. Here you can use any exception class like arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, or any other exception class. You can create object of any exception class here and throws your own exception. So I hope that you understand about our own throw and Java default catch mechanism. So if you feel any problem, you can definitely ask me a question. I will help you. In our next video, we will discuss about our own throw and our own catch block. So that's it for this video. I will see you in next video. Hello and welcome back to this course. In our previous video, we have discussed about our own throw and the Java by default catch mechanism. I can also type here the try catch block. For example, if I want to use my own try catch, I simply just after this line I type here try. Now I have to write all the code in the try block that has a relationship with this line, that is dependent on this line. And in this case, these two lines are dependent on this line. So I type these lines in the try block, and just after that I type the catch block, and the catch block I type here you can say the arithmetic exception, because here I am throwing the arithmetic exception. So here I type here the arithmetic exception which I want to catch. So I type here arithmetic exception E, and just after that I print a statement here, system.out.println our catch, like this, and I type here e dot get message. Okay, so now we have used our own try catch, and also we have used our own throw mechanism here. And now if I run this program, you will see our catch block is executed. You don't have enough balance, and our program is going to continue. Now, we get the exception on this line. We throw this exception, and the lines after that is not going to execute, because we know that in try block, whenever we get exception, the remaining lines are not going to execute. So these lines are not executed, and we will throw the exception that we don't have enough balance. And when we throw the exception, we throw the object of the arithmetic exception. The catch block catch that object and print the message on the screen. And after that, our program is going to continue. You can see this line is outside the try catch. Our program is going to continue has been printed on the screen. In this way, we can write our own try catch block, and we can also throw our own exception explicitly. Now, exception handling is very important in the programming to create an application, because exception handling make our application robust, that has no errors in them. This is now in this example, this is the basically error. Now for Java, this is not an exception, but in the eyes of human, this is a very big exception, that the withdrawal amount is less than the that withdrawal amount is greater than the balance. So this is the arithmetic exception. So we have handled this exception by using our try catch and our own throw mechanism. So I hope that you understand. Now this is the unchecked exception. Arithmetic exception, null pointer exception are types of the unchecked exception, and in our next video we will discuss about the checked exception, that what is checked exception and how we can handle them. So I hope that you understand this video. So if you feel any problem, you can definitely ask me a question, or you can message me. I will definitely help you. So that's it for this video. I will see you in next video. Hello and welcome back to this course. This is the last video about the exception handling, in which we learn about the checked exception. In our previous videos, we have discussed about the unchecked exception. Basically, we got the unchecked exception at the runtime, and the checked exception appears at the compile time. For example, in the checked exception, we have the IO exception, we have SQL exception, and many other exceptions like that. These are the classes that are the checked exceptions. Now, when sometime you write your code, you will get the compile time error that this thing may contains the exception. So you have to type the try catch block, or you have to tell Java that Java has to handle this exception. For example, I type here. We know that we can also throw the exception. So I type here throw new IO exception, like this. Now we have to import the IO exception. It is present in the IO package, which is the IO exception class, in this way. And now you can see the error. Unreported exception IO exception must be caught or declared to be thrown. Now if I run this program, you will see the, I click on anyway, you can see exception in the thread main. Java.io exception must be caught or declared to be thrown at exception handling. It means that we have to write our own try catch block, or we have to tell Java that you have to handle this exception. Now how we can tell the Java to handle this exception? We are going to use the throws keyword. This is the throw keyword, and if we want to tell Java that you have to handle this exception, then we use the throws keyword. Now we write throws just after the name of the method in which we have written that code. In this case, we have written the code in the main method. So I type here throws, and I type here IO exception, like this. And now you can see that error has gone, because now we have tell Java that you have to handle this IO exception. We have throws the IO exception. But now the default cache mechanism of Java is used, and our program is going to exit if IO exception occurs. So by using the throws, we are just removing the compile time error. But to make our application robust, we must have to use our own try catch block. We can also use the throws keyword to tell Java that you have to handle this exception, but the best programming approach that we have to write our own try catch block. So I remove this from here and I type my own try catch. I type here try and I type this line in this try block like this, and just after that I type here catch, and I want to catch the IO exception, so I type here IO exception E and system dot out dot println, and I type here E dot get message like this. Okay. So also in this way we can handle the checked exception by using the try catch block, or if you don't want to use the try catch block, you can simply throws that exception. Like I type here throws and then IO exception like this. This is also a way to remove the compile time exception error. So I hope that you understand that how we can use the try, how we can use the catch, finally throw and throws keyword. These are the keywords that are used in the exception handling. So in this way we can handle our exceptions in the Java programming. I hope you understand. Now one more thing that you have to keep in your mind, that here we are using the throws IO exception. This is the checked exception. We are getting the exception error at the compile time, and in the unchecked exception we are getting the exception error at the runtime. So this is the difference between the checked and the unchecked exception. There the compiler does not check for the exception. The exception occurs at the runtime, but here the compiler check for the exception, and we have to handle that exception before running that program at the compile time. It is not compulsory that the exception always occur in the checked exception, but the compiler thinks that the exception may occur in this line. So that's why we have to handle that through the exception handling, and we use our own try catch or throws to handle the checked exception. I hope that you understand. Anyhow, if you feel any problem while understanding any topic in the exception handling, you can definitely ask me a question or message me. I am always here to help you. So I hope you understand. That's it for this video. I will see you in next video.